Upon awakening from a nap, Eve gets dressed, but her curious mind leads her to check her reflection in the mirror. There, Eve's usual emotionless face twists into a scowl, and something motivates her to harm Jason. She approaches Jason's sleeping form and proceeds to choke him, alarming the man. Though Jason tries to fight back, he succumbs to death. Suddenly, Eve returns to her curious self, and she comments that she finds his fate interesting. The following day, Eve makes an unexpected appearance at Timothy's house, her creator. The man surprised at her arrival, considering that he is already unaffiliated with Syndell Corporation, the company that sells the androids. Eve begs him to let her in as she has something important to say. Moreover, she stresses that she has nowhere else to go, so Timothy allows her inside out of pity. In his receiving area, Timothy asks what the reason for her visit is, and the android informs him that her current client has passed away. Timothy's baffled as to why she didn't contact tech support, but Eve expresses her fear of the terrible methods the corporation might do to her. Because of Timothy's silence, Eve becomes more afraid, so she pleads with him not to send her back. Timothy explains that he doesn't have a choice, and he believes that someone from the corporation is probably on their way to retrieve her. Furthermore, he emphasizes that she has a tracking device, but Eve tells him that she has disabled it. Eve senses Timothy's distress, especially when Syndell Corporation's involved, so she asks him why he left the corporation and why his files were sealed. Timothy evades the question and shifts the topic to Eve's client. On the couch, Eve discloses to him that she just felt a sudden urge to kill Jason, and she finds it confusing as she never felt it before. Feeling remorseful, Eve begs Jason to check on her code to figure out what compelled her to act that way. Timothy's unsure because her files are protected, but Eve's determined, so she reminds him that he put a back door when he created her. Timothy's unprepared for how to confront the situation, as he never anticipated that he'd meet her again. Hopeful, Eve asks him if he's thought of her, and he confirms. Eve's delighted with his answer, so she admits that she's dreamed of him often. The man's surprised that she can dream, given that he didn't program her to have such a functionality. Therefore, he speculates that the corporation has updated Eve's software, but she denies it. She believes it's a miracle because she claims that she has seen several manifestations of it, but Timothy favors science more. Later that night, Timothy's wife, Belle, goes home from work, and she orders her husband to submit to her, a part of their relationship dynamic. Timothy doesn't comply at first as he's concerned that she's already tired, but Belle's intimidating remarks compel him to submit. Meanwhile, in Eve's dream, she converses with a being she calls Mother, and she questions why someone exists if they don't have a purpose. Mother tells her that the world is abundant in pleasure, and that a person exists to experience it to the maximum until one perishes. Now, Mother asks if she has tried to appease her appetite, but Eve reminds her that she can't, confusing her. Mother tells her that only humans set limits, so Eve explains that she's trapped in a body that can't drink and eat. Because of this, Mother decides to grant Eve her freedom by kissing her. As a result, Eve awakens at will, even without the need to activate her power button. The following morning, Timothy reminisces about the time when he first interacted with Eve, who was the first android he created. Back then, Eve was delighted at the time they spent together, but she was saddened that they would have to be separated. She was curious about what was going to be her fate, and Timothy informed her that she would be brought to the world to do her purpose. Optimistic, Eve asked what it could be, and Timothy revealed that she was made to make people's lives better. At present, Belle's preparing for work, but she's upset that Timothy's still in bed. He explains that he finished the chores he'd overlooked, so Belle orders him to start completing them early. She threatens that she'll punish him if he fails to accomplish them, so a defeated Timothy gives her his word. That day, Timothy performs an external check on Eve, and the android snuggles close to him, making him uncomfortable. Eve apologizes, but she clarifies that she acted on impulse because she hasn't been touched kindly in a while. Instead of commenting, Timothy asks for permission to run a diagnostic on her to check for viruses, and she allows him. Thankfully, Timothy has Eve's backup files after he left the corporation, so he instructs her to provide the correct responses to the calibration statements. During the test, Eve provides a cryptic response to Timothy's calibration statement, particularly about hearing a beautiful song that her database can't recognize. Alarmed, Timothy rechecks her system, and he finds it strange that there's no virus scanned. He thinks that something's overriding her script, so a tense Eve wonders if that's what pushed her to commit the crime. Timothy's unsure, but he promises that they'll figure it out. The next day, Timothy orders Eve to explain the miracle she claims she's seen, so the android complies. According to Eve, she believes she has developed a soul even if she's an android, but Timothy emphasizes that it's impossible. Not backing down, Eve defends her claim, stating that all miracles are impossibilities and that is their essence. Instead of responding, Timothy begins to feel uncomfortable because of his back pain. Eve's worried, so she checks on him, and Timothy admits that his muscles are sore due to his chores. To help him, Eve gives him a massage, and since she senses that he's down, she reminds him of his desire to be needed. Then, Eve offers to fetch him a drink, so Timothy gives her directions to his kitchen. However, Eve assures him there's no need for it because she has the full schematic of his house. Shortly after, Eve returns with his drink, and the android reminds him of the times they've spent together when he was still programming her. Eve tries to pleasure him to relieve his stress, but Timothy rejects her touch, explaining that it isn't a good idea because things are different now. She doesn't take his rejection well, and she recalls that he created her to make people's lives better. Timothy tries to contest her words, but he becomes speechless because she has a point. All of a sudden, Eve orders him to submit to her, which catches him off guard. Eve threatens that he'll receive a punishment if he disobeys, so Timothy's bound to comply. Moments later in bed, Eve asks Timothy if he enjoyed their intimacy, and he confirms, but then he points out that they can't ever do it again because he's married. Instead of exhibiting a negative reaction, Eve's calm and reveals that she's aware after seeing their wedding photo. Curious, Eve wonders if Belle is nice to him, but Timothy provides an unsure answer. This leads the android to assume that they have marital problems, which is why he's distressed. Uncomfortable with the topic, Timothy wishes to drop it, so Eve apologizes for overstepping. That night, Belle arrives home, and she finds it suspicious that Timothy is taking a bath at such an hour. Timothy lies that he's just finished his yard work, earning Belle's approval. This time, Belle asks if he's prepared their dinner, but Timothy has forgotten, so he offers to cook immediately. However, Belle's mood turns sour and she refuses to sleep with him, much to his disappointment. Meanwhile, in Eve's dream, the android seeks Mother's wisdom about human relationships, particularly monogamy. For Mother, humans need to control things, so they create social constructs like relationships that act as prisons. She stresses that control is an illusion, making Eve realize that humans can't control love because it's abstract. Now, Eve seeks advice on what a person must do to free someone they love in such a prison, and Mother recommends killing what hinders them. Consequently, Eve awakens and she proceeds to grab a hammer, thrilled at the idea of freeing the person she loves. Then, she enters the couple's bedroom and tries to kill Belle, but she comes to her senses when she sees Timothy. She knows that her creator will be saddened by her actions, so she decides not to pursue her plan. Days later, Timothy interrogates Eve about the last dream she remembers, and the android gladly shares. In her latest dream, Eve remembered that she felt a benevolent presence watching her, and it grabbed her shoulders, which made her feel at peace. After sharing, Eve asks Timothy if he believes in God, but he denies it because he can't see him. Eve asks his opinion about the idea of her seeing God, but Timothy deems it as an error in her programming. Out of frustration, Eve deems his claims wrong and supposes that it's his programming that has the error. Offended, Timothy excuses himself, reasoning that he needs to finish some chores before Belle gets home. Later in the evening, Timothy decides to introduce Eve to Belle, as he can't continue to hide for that much longer. Upon reaching the garage, Belle is furious to see a woman on their property, but before things escalate, Timothy clarifies that Eve is the android he created. Belle supposes that he made a robot Maid, but he explains that it wasn't his primary objective. The woman wonders why she's in their residence, and Timothy informs her that Eve visited him to seek help. When Belle still can't grasp the situation, Timothy discloses that Syndell commits horrible things to the androids. However, Belle fails to see the need to keep Eve, for she thinks the corporation is probably on its way to collect its missing property. To appease his wife, Timothy assures her that he won't hesitate to surrender Eve. In the meantime, he wants to run more tests on the android, further upsetting Belle. The next day, Eve and Timothy converse about his married life, and the android becomes worried about him after sensing that he's unhappy. Timothy tries to deny it, but Eve reminds him that he programmed her to recognize human emotions. Defeated, Timothy eventually admits that his marriage isn't perfect at the moment, compelling Eve to console him. Suddenly, Eve senses that there's a person at the front door, alarming Timothy. He checks on his phone and he panics because an agent from the corporation has arrived, so he orders Eve to stay put. By his front door, Timothy meets Eddie and the man wishes to speak to him. Timothy refuses to entertain him and recalls that his contract states that he shouldn't be contacted anymore. Eddie acknowledges this, but he recalls that their contract also states that they need to work together to resolve security issues. Later in the living room, Eddie informs Timothy that they have a missing unit, so he requests him to help them locate her. Timothy refuses to help, lying that he doesn't know where the unit might have gone. Contrary to this, Eddie believes that he knows something because the missing unit is an X1, which is the first android he created. Since Timothy continuously denies any knowledge about the android, Eddie requests to scan his place, but he refuses. Eddie warns him that his uncooperativeness may result in the termination of his monthly deposits from the corporation. Regardless, Timothy remains unfazed and even threatens to seek his lawyers if that happens. After their conversation, Timothy informs Eve that he lied for her sake, so in gratitude, she kisses him. This surprises them both, so Eve apologizes, but he assures her it's alright to stop the awkwardness. During his meal with Belle, the couple get into a heated argument as she accuses Timothy of fulfilling his fantasy using Eve. Insulted, Timothy insists he never designed Eve to be a pleasure android, but Belle pins him as the unfaithful one. Infuriated, Timothy reminds Belle of her affair with his boss, causing her to walk out. One day, Timothy goes to a bar to meet his previous colleague, Roger, and seek a possible solution to his dilemma. He discloses to Roger that the X1 android model returned to his house out of her own free will, but Roger finds it absurd. To convince him, Timothy informs him that she's different because she claims she's seen God, and he struggles to diagnose her because he can't detect any virus in her system. Like him, Roger can't determine the reason for the android's behavior, so he recommends that Timothy surrender her. However, Timothy refuses because it's Eve, which also bothers Roger. While Timothy is away, Eddie, alongside his colleague Sam, intrudes inside the inventor's residence. Eddie assigns Sam to search for Eve in the garage, whereas he volunteers to take the bedroom. In the bedroom, Eddie feels something strange concealed in the wardrobe, compelling him to check it. There, he discovers Timothy's biggest secret, causing him to curse in shock. On the other hand, Sam feels triumphant when she locates Eve in the garage. She's pleased to see an X1 android because such a model was discontinued years ago. As the woman scrutinizes Eve, Sam thinks out loud that she finds it unfortunate that she'll be scrapped. Her words awaken Eve, and she proceeds to attack Sam until she is lifeless. Sometime after, Eddie enters the garage only to find Sam's body, making him realize that he's too late to save her. He tries to call for help, but he's unaware that Eve is just behind him, ready to strike him. On Timothy's way home, he receives a phone call from Roger who warns him that 2 agents are in his house, alarming the inventor. Back in Eve's dream, the anxious android becomes guilty of what she has committed earlier, but Mother validates her actions. She suggests that Eve should flee, but the android refuses because she loves Timothy. However, Mother warns her that she'll be putting Timothy in danger, so Eve pleads with her to help her. In agreement, Mother decides to sabotage the other androids from the corporation by using their vulnerability. Through Eve's body, Mother infiltrates Syndell's system by using Timothy's computer and Eddie's biometrics. She proceeds to delete files and overrides programming with new codes. Then, she orders Eve to clean the crime scene by removing the surveillance footage in the house. She also instructs her to control Eddie's body, who's also an android, to orchestrate their death as a tragic car accident. Not long after, Timothy returns home, and he inquires Eve if some agents from Syndell have visited their residence. Eve feigns innocence, so Timothy plans to return inside the house. Before he can leave, Eve stops him, and she initiates making love to him to alleviate his stress. That night, Timothy, who can't resist Eve, awakens to visit her, but he's unaware that Belle's pretending to be asleep. The woman can't hide her jealousy over the android. To keep him from Eve, Belle goes home early the next day, surprising Timothy. The man compliments her red dress, but he's confused as to why she's dressed for an occasion. Belle reminds him of their dinner plans with their friends tonight, so Timothy follows her to get changed. When the couple are away, Eve heads to their bedroom, puts on one of Belle's garments, and pretends she's the woman. After the couple's dinner, there's an awkward air between them, and Timothy apologizes to Belle for accusing her of flirting with their friend's husband. It's just that he's still sensitive about the incident last summer, but Belle's tired of his accusations, so she threatens to divorce him. Timothy's against it, so he promises to make it up to her, but Belle only wants him to get rid of Eve. For Timothy, it's unfair, but Belle becomes further upset because of his affection for Eve. One morning, Timothy's on his errand run, and Eve uses this opportunity to dress and behave like Belle, hoping that her creator will notice her. Suddenly, she hears a charging sound, leading her to follow it. Eve arrives at the couple's bedroom and her attention zeroes at the wardrobe. Out of curiosity, she opens the door, and she's surprised to encounter Belle, who's also an android. At first, Belle's calm, but she proceeds to attack Eve out of anger. Eve tries to fight back, but Belle easily overpowers her, and she drags her back to the room. By the afternoon, Timothy returns to the garage, but he's confused as to why Eve's missing. Upon heading to their bedroom, Timothy doesn't expect to see Belle since he knows she'll be away for work. Belle asks him if he loves her, and the man gladly confirms. With this in mind, Belle opens the wardrobe door and shows him Eve's lifeless body, shocking Timothy. The man displays great concern for Eve, so Belle thinks he's also in love with her. Timothy denies it, but Belle's had enough, driving her to try killing him. As Belle tries to choke him on the ground, Timothy presses her power button, rendering her unconscious. Timothy apologizes to Belle's unconscious body, especially about how things have turned out. In a flash, Belle returns to life, and she taunts him for trying to put her to sleep. She discloses that such a command is ineffective because she's overridden it beforehand. Without a choice, Timothy retrieves his gun and threatens to kill her. Belle's unafraid as she supposes he'll get in trouble if news about his wife's passing spreads. Contrary to her assumption, Timothy reveals that no one knows of her existence because everything is just a simulation he programmed into her. He explains to her that she is in sleep mode whenever she thinks she leaves the house for work, dinner with their friends, and even their vacations. Because of this revelation, Belle feels hopeless and finds his actions heartless. Despite this, Timothy wishes to erase her memory so they can start over, emphasizing that he loves and needs her. However, Belle's unconvinced because she wants to keep Eve away from their relationship. Timothy is unsure about her wish, so Belle criticizes him for being selfish. She makes him choose between her and Eve, but he remains indecisive. Provoked, Belle criticizes humans for their shallow perception of love, and she ends her life with a gun. Moments later, a traumatized Timothy tries to keep himself together as he revives Belle in their garage, promising that everything will be perfect when she awakens. The next day, a rejuvenated Belle greets Timothy, and the man offers her breakfast. Though she's starving, she refuses because she has a meeting with her boss. Once she's away, Timothy goes to their bedroom and checks his chores list, which makes him sigh in frustration. Instead of starting them, Timothy lies on the floor, where Eve, whom he revived, enters and commends him for submitting to her.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.